Shifting. That little blue line's going across. The only book I could find of yours, I've lent my other ones out, is this one.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've got a few. Oh, here we go. Let's have a look. Okay, so it looks like we are live. And it's got a picture of me up there, whatever that means. I don't know. So we'll just go with it. If it's a picture of me doing yoga in front of Uluru, Paul, and not a picture of you and me, I apologize.
That's okay. No worries. Yeah.
Okay. I can change that later. Okay. So if we are live on YouTube, welcome everybody. It's been a while since I've been here, and I've got a very special guest today, Paul Levy, who I haven't spoken to for about a year. The last interview we did, Paul, was that's on my BitChute channel. And you are the author of the books, the Wetiko. As I just said to you, I've got this one. I've lent my other ones out to friends. But this is Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues Our World. And I know this is, you probably recite this information in your sleep at this point because it's your life's work. But I'm very pleased and very happy for you to have granted me another chance to have a chat with you, because there's lots of stuff going on in the last couple of weeks, especially. And some big stuff happening here, apparently in Australia too, which I'd love to get your take on. But for anybody who is new here and hasn't come across Paul's work before, do you want to give us just a quick little intro about yourself, a little bio, Paul?
Yeah, for sure. Well, my background is not normal in that, I'm 68, and when I was in my early 20s, I was really suffering, as a result of this incredible over-the-top trauma. And the story isn't important, but the suffering was really what just overtook my life, to the point where it forced me inwards. It forced me to turn my awareness back on awareness itself, where I just assumed the witness in my own mind to try to get to the root of what was the cause of this over-the-top suffering. And then I did that for a couple of years because I had no choice. And then when I was 24, sitting in meditation one day, I just got hit by a bolt of lightning. It just ignited in my brain, and not from the sky, but inside my own mind. And I right away, within hours, began having the realization, it was the beginning of this overwhelming realization that we're having a collectively shared dream. And I was so excited and ecstatic at what I was realizing that it freaked people out, friends of mine. And I immediately got thrown in a mental hospital and told, oh, you're mentally ill. You have this chemical imbalance. You'll have this illness the rest of your life. You'll need to be on medication, till your dying breath. And I just thought they were crazy. And so I was fortunate because the next 18 months, I was just a free agent out in the world. I wasn't in an ashram or a monastery. I kept on having this deepening, this realization of the dreamlike nature. And, as far as I was concerned, it was the good news of the Bible, or, it was, oh my God, what, all of us are just having dreams about, of waking up. And, but over that next 18 months, about 3, 4, 5 other times, I got hospitalized and diagnosed, and it was brutal. And, I was fortunate that I never bought into the diagnosis one bit. And then afterwards, I would look back and I understood, oh, that was part of the awakening. Instead of being error, that was in a way my shamanic descent into the darkness of the unconscious, into the hell realm. I would never have believed that psychiatry would just be so mad and so abusive, and so whatever switched on is the opposite of switched on. And so then I had a double trauma, not only the abuse, which was emotional abuse from my father, but the incredible psychological abuse from psychiatry. And, and that was the start of my path. I was really fortunate in that, like I said, I never bought in to the diagnoses. On the contrary, I was diagnosing the psychiatrists as they were diagnosing me. And now, 40 plus years later, I have psychiatrists, who pay me money to talk to me. So it's really come full circle. And then it took me a number of years to integrate what I was realizing and to integrate the trauma of it. And then, maybe, I don't know, 12 years later, I began teaching because I realized, I'm not an enlightened person or anything, but I have something as a result of the ordeal that I've realized that could be helpful for people.
Mhm.
And and what I was basically teaching was that, oh, we're having a collectively shared dream, and just like a night dream, where we can recognize we're dreaming and have a lucid dream, the same thing is available to us in our waking dream. And so then a whole community formed around me, and then I began, I've written 3 books about there being a mind virus, the Watiko mind virus, right? That's the second of the 3 books. And and that's the it's like I want to say really clearly, this is the diagnosis for the madness that our species is acting out,
Mm.
and the evil that's playing out in the world. And when people hear about a mind virus, they think, oh, that sounds kind of like sort of woo-woo or new agey. But all that it really means is that the source of and the solution of our collective madness is to be found within our minds. And that's a no-brainer. Like, where else in the world could the source of our collective madness be found?
Mm.
And I joke to my friends that if I, had like a really, I have a publicist, but if I had a publicity department, they couldn't do a better job publicizing my work than what's playing out on the world stage.
Right now.
And
Channel.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's just a little bit
Mhm.
of intro about how I came to my work. So it's not, I don't have any degree in this, it's all come out of my own experience. It's not just some sort of theory,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, this is the from my perspective anyway, Paul. It's like this is what qualifies us as humans when we share our lived experiences. Like this happened
right.
to me, this happened to me, um, and I'm sure you've had this many times before, and a lot of other people like myself, whether they've been speaking out, publicly about certain things that have been happening in the last couple of years. That being accused of lying when you're sharing your lived experience, and that's your truth. I mean, that's we'll get into this because that's all part of the Wetiko or the Watiko, as
Yeah,
you say, the
yeah,
mind virus. Now, the parasite, the link between physical parasites that a lot of people are experiencing now, and the mental realm, as well as the consciousness that's just
yeah.
going next level crazy. When all that was happening for you, because that's like the full, I remember we spoke about that last time. It's the full one flew over the cuckoo's nest situation, which is just horrendous that that system thinks that it can actually work for a start. I've
Yeah,
had
yeah.
family members in that as well. You had no idea at that point about the Native American Indian, the Watiko, that
No,
concept.
I was in my early 20s. I was just, like a young kid out of college who was pursuing, I was drawing and painting and wanted to be an artist, and I knew nothing about any of this stuff. I
Yep.
knew nothing about shamanism, and here I'd gotten enlisted into a shamanic initiatory process
Mm.
without having any idea about what that even was, you
Yeah.
know. And just going back to psychiatry, you talking about, somebody speaking their truth, the insanity of the situation I found myself in when they would ask me to describe my experience and I would do that, they would basically react by saying, no, that's not what your experience is. And I
Mm.
was the one having the experience, and they were telling me what
Mm.
I was experiencing when they weren't having my experience. It was just insane. I literally couldn't believe it. And the thing is, though, in our world today, I mean, we all know it's not safe to speak what you're really seeing. It's a
Mm.
dangerous act. It's a radical act.
Yeah.
When Watiko, this mind virus, when it's around, when it's in the room, so to speak, it's dangerous to speak. You'll get deplatformed, demonetized, censored, attacked, all those things.
Mm.
And that's an indication that this mind virus is actually, in the field.
Yeah, there's no denying that its existence for sure. And interesting that you say about the censorship, Paul, because today in Australia, it's yet to go through the Senate, but it's gone through the lower house here in Australian Parliament. The misinformation bill, which basically gives blanket censorship here in Australia. No one's allowed to say anything that is any vaguely related to being in opposition to the government and the media, the mainstream media narrative. You'll be arrested, imprisoned. Like this bill
You
is
see, that blows. I mean, that doesn't surprise me, but that blows me away because who's the one who decides what's true? Who's the one who decides what's misinformation?
Mm.
And I think, you know, I mean, it's happening not just in Australia, but I think in the US and all over the world, that the powers that be have an agreed upon story. Here's
Mm.
their agreed upon this narrative. And anybody who like points that it's, wait a second, that's not true, or has a different perspective, they
Mm.
immediately get criminalized and, you know, arrested, put in jail, shut down. It's unbelievable.
Mm.
And you know that should really get our attention. Like, what is that? That's incredibly evil. And one
Yep.
of the edges I find in our world today is I'm very careful with my choice of words. And so many people, when they react to when I'll use the word evil, but I'll point out there's no better word to use, you
Mm.
know, because what evil is, it's like if you think about healing and integrating,
Mm.
it's the opposite. It's this disintegrating energy.
Yep.
It disintegrates us within our own person and
Mm.
from each other, you know?
Yep.
And it's very much like I had a dream once where I was having a lucid dream and I was telling my dream characters that, hey, we're having a dream. And one guy came up and said, hey man, could you use a different word than dream? I have kind of, it's a charged word and I have these weird associations. And I'm like thinking to myself in the dream, wow, what a conundrum. What other word would I want to use other than saying this is a dream? And
Yeah.
here's one of the people in the dream saying, no, 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 don't use that word. It's kind of like with when I use the word evil there, you know, because evil, it like takes away our ability to speak,
Mm.
you know, it dumbs us down where we can't even talk about what's playing out.
Mm.
And there's something playing out in our world that there's no better word for it than evil. And
And
that's what Watiko is. Watiko is the source of evil, but it's a quantum phenomena where it contains in a superposition of states within itself both the source of evil, both within our own individual minds, in relationship with each other, collectively as a body politic, but it also contains its own medicine. So that's the thing which is unbelievable about Watiko. It's both, it can, you know, destroy us because it's the source of the evil that we're playing out, and it contains, in a way, its own vaccine. And it's not just containing its own cure, it's actually helping us to awaken.
yep.
So what Tico is, it's like this revelation. It's a living revelation that's teaching us everything we need to know to evolve and to awaken. But if we don't recognize what it's revealing to us, it'll kill us. It'll
Yep.
assume its programmed function of taking us down.
Mm.
So the question I ask is this mind virus going to take us down or is it going to awaken us? And it all depends on us. It depends if we recognize what's being revealed to us.
Yeah, well, that's the million squillion dollar question, isn't it? I mean, just on a side note, I'm not kidding. Like almost every day in the last couple of weeks, I've seen a car number plate EVL, like just driving in front of me, like evil. I'm driving along, going, why am I
Oh,
seeing all these car
right,
number plates with evil on it? So yeah,
right,
definitely.
right.
You know, the light, the shadow. I mean, people can insert their own language there that makes them feel comfortable, of course. But that's the big question, Paul, because I get asked this a lot, and I'm sure you do a lot more than I do, obviously. But you know, the concept that we have brought everything that we need for our spiritual growth and evolution in with us when we incarnated in our energy field, and that therefore at any time that something happens to us in life is just it's the right time. Some sort of trauma triggers that and everything opens up, and like yourself, like you had that experience, and then you go into deeper layers. You either go with that and come out the other side from that rite of passage, or you resist it and keep building up and building up. And no, that's another set of choices as well. So if we are all doing that individually, how responsible are we for all the stuff? You mentioned this in the book, like we're all participating. When we see the evil stuff playing out in the world stage, then it's an opportunity. Some people will go, oh, well, that's happening out there. It's got nothing to do with me. But the more conscious ones I present to you, we're going, what part in me is contributing to that? Or how can I use that as a positive to start working through my own shadow? So can you
Yeah,
get
yeah, yeah.
in on that? Because I know there's a lot of people
Yeah.
that are confused.
That's exactly right. I'll run into people who will say, "Oh, the evil that's playing out in the world, it's reflecting some part in you," and they're like, "No, no, no, I'm not participating. I have nothing to do," and they're just asleep. because when you see this being this universe as a collectively shared dream, and by the way, that's exactly what every wisdom tradition from time immemorial is saying in their own way. And when you see that, you have the realization that, oh, we're all characters in each other's dreams, that everybody is an embodied reflection of parts of ourselves, and that whatever's playing out, say something horrendous, a war or evil or something like that, that there's no getting around that. We're inside being a dream. If you wake up to the dream, you recognize we're inside of our own psyche. This is the world. Jung is saying the world is psyche. There's not like psyche in our skull and the world out there. No, it's one seamlessly interconnected quantum whole. This universe has been discovered, empirically proven, again and again, to be quantum in nature. What does that mean? A quantum system, there's no separate parts interacting. It's all, an interactive whole. And so if something's happening out there, in the same way that if you're in a night dream and something's happening in the night dream, that's an expression, it's your own energy that's appearing through the medium of the night dream, that's reflecting an inner process. This is why every spiritual tradition talks about when you make the inner as the outer, that's when you begin to awaken. And making the inner as the outer, that's the recognition of the dreamlike nature. So my whole work is basically trying to help people to become lucid in the dream and to see, basically to see the nature of our circumstance, i.e. that we're co-dreaming. And when enough of us actually tap into that and connect with each other and get in phase with each other, we discover something. And what we discover is that, oh my God, we can change the dream we're having, the waking dream. And that's not some sort of theory. That's actually the nature of our situation. And just to give you an example, like say if I'm having a night dream and it's an ordinary dream, I think I don't realize I'm dreaming, the universe I'm in seems subjective and real and solid. And then all of a sudden something happens and I have that moment of recognizing that I'm dreaming and I'm having a lucid dream, right? And imagine then if I connect with other of my dream characters who are just parts of myself, and they're also having becoming lucid, and we hang out together and we like trip out and contemplate, what are we realizing? Oh my God, we're realizing this universe that we're in, this collective dream, it's manifesting in such a problematic, limited, nightmarish way because we've been programmed and conditioned to dream it that way.
Yeah.
Okay. And what that means is that, oh my God, we could dream it different, that it's within our power. It's what I call our sacred power of dreaming. We can consciously connect with that, get in phase with each other, and dream a dream that's more in alignment with who we're discovering ourselves to be, which is that we're not separate, that we're interconnected. And that's just, that's an example in a night dream. That's the nature of our situation in the waking dream. And to realize that it's what all of this is about, and it's to actually consciously step into to participate in our own evolutionary process. That's what's being offered to us. And if we don't do that, then we're fated to continue to destroy ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, so now we've got an hour. We've got an hour together today, Paul. So I want to get into this straight away. And it was one of the main things that I want to speak to you as the authority on this subject. Is that today it's the 11th, the 8th of the 11th, right? November the 8th. And there's been a big prediction, which is based in a lot of very valid symbology as far as, things when you look at 9/11 or the gematria and those sorts of things. We know there is a very deep level of the occult that's operating, the death cult around this planet, orchestrating weather dramas and wars and selections and all that sort of stuff. So there's been today in Sydney, there are a few predictions that there's going to be some sort of terrorist attack, which will most likely be covered up as some sort of gas leak explosion or some other sort of accident connected to infrastructure. Okay, so there's been a lot of people in the last couple of weeks doing really great work. sharing that information and researching that, and looking at all the, even down to television shows from the past, like 20 years ago, showing the exact scenes about what is supposedly meant to happen today. So when we're looking at something like that, the symbolism that's very real and that people can piece together and make predictions, right? So we're creating that, and you've got the people that go, okay, we need to warn everybody about this possibility, to try and wake them up or at least spare them harm. And you've got other people that can go, okay, I can see the validity of that, but I'm not going to live my life in fear. I don't want to give it energy because I'm going to create it. How do we explain that within the Watiko framework? Because that's what's really happening, certainly in Australia today. And who knows, it might happen and then we're all stuffed. I hope it doesn't happen. But if it does, our reality's changed. So have we made that happen, or was that always going to happen?
No, that's a really good question.
Early
And
question, sorry. There's a few.
I'm not really sure how to answer, except just to, there is something about, each of us are we're like a sovereign being who gets to choose where we place our attention. And when we focus our attention in a certain way, our attention is creative. It evokes, certain scenarios. And, it's like if somebody has a dream of some sort of like catastrophe, and then they wake up and the next day that catastrophe happens, were they tapping into the non-local psyche and seeing, outside of time what was going to happen? Or some people have that experience and they feel kind of guilty. Oh, did I make it happen by me having the dream? And it's a really interesting question, and just to associate, because I don't really know how to answer that in a really sort of scientific way, but I think of, in my work, I study the work of the psychiatrist Jung. And, and he was, by the way, completely switched on to Watiko. He didn't have the name. The main name he called it was totalitarian psychosis. And because Watiko is a collective psychosis. And this, why I bring up Jung, he kept on having these repeating visions that would go on for like an hour or two, and they happened a number of times. And in his visions, all the waterways in Europe were overflowing with water, with dead bodies, with blood. And he kept on having this, just autonomously. His ego, his conscious mind wasn't creating it. And he actually was worried, oh my God, am I going crazy? And then the First World War broke out. And he realized, oh, he was tapping in to the non-local psyche, and, in a prophetic way. And so, I'm like, I think it's great that people are awake to the non-local psyche, to our natural telepathy, we have this prescience where we can tell what might be happening, but with the understanding in quantum physics. And that's why I wrote a book on quantum physics, because that's offering the medicine for Watiko. Quantum physics is saying this universe is not deterministic. It's probabilistic. There's nothing that's written in stone. So it could be that these people who are tracking this, the symbology could be tuning in to that there's something that might be happening that's looking probable, like it might be happening, but yet, the question, if people focus on that, is that increasing the probability, or is that a way of ensuring that they don't get harmed and they can take caution? I mean, who knows? But that's this rabbit hole that's a great contemplation to go down.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's, again, everybody has to have their experience, and that's all valid as well, because everybody's on their own trajectory with those sorts of things. So, I mean, if it doesn't happen today, whatever, it's supposed to be, then that's, again, there will be people that will either be upset, there'll be people that will accuse people of, fear mongering and all that sort of crazy stuff, which again is a reaction of that mind parasite, isn't it? Trying to get control and to be, ultimately I see it of just being, always divided. That's the irony when you peel away all the different layers of the things that we're experiencing as humanity, as a global family. We keep going back to this division of like an opinion and ego, as you said, of like where we need to actually come together, turn around and look at the actual common enemy and just go, hang on a minute. And this you know, this, I mean, you obviously know this has been going on for centuries and centuries, this mind virus,
Yeah,
this program,
yeah,
I want to call it. So I always see it like now, whatever's happening and however bad things are getting or looking like they're getting and dismantling, that's just bringing us closer to that cliff precipice again as a species, where we're either going to throw ourselves off the cliff into a new reality and to a new way of engagement with ourselves and one another, or we're going to look at there and go, oh, that's too scary, and reverse and go into another cycle of the same shit.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting, because what's happening is in a way sort of like this diabolical energy, and the word diabolos,
Mm,
etymologically, what it means is that which separates, that
mm,
which divides. Okay. And it's the opposite of when you awaken and you see through the illusion of the separate self and you realize, oh,
mm,
we're all one. There's no separate self. We're all interconnected,
yeah.
Now, what you also brought up is that, I mean, it's a thing. It's happened to me, and it's a known psychological fact that when in dreams, when people are at that precipice, at that edge of the cliff, in the corner, in a no-win situation, in a double bind,
Yeah.
it's not uncommon. That's when they become lucid.
Mm,
Okay. And that's what's available for all of us, is that the creative tension of the opposites in the individual and the collective psyche, it's so intense right now, and we're all feeling it, whether we're consciously feeling it or not.
yeah.
But the idea of holding that creative tension consciously and not splitting,
Mm-hmm.
and not just like identifying with one of the opposites and repressing the other, but really holding that creative tension, out of that comes the creative. Because again and again in my work, I'm talking about that the real medicine for the madness and the evil that we're confronted with is to, access the creative spirit, because
Yeah.
that is our nature. We are creative beings,
Mm,
like people, like, one person, a client today was asking me, she was first, coming across Watiko, and she's like, you know, um, what is the real medicine for, the deepest protection against Watiko? And I said, well, it really has to do with connecting with who you are, with your true nature. But that's such a cliche. What does that even mean? And I point out that, well, our true nature by its very nature is creative. So when you have realization of your nature, you embody and express yourself creatively. And the more you do that, the deeper you realize your nature in a positive feedback loop. And that creates light, you know?
yeah, yeah. It's a hard conversation to have with people that, because we all started off somewhere. I mean, you had your massive catharsis there, and I've had several in my life. I know you've had several as well. Everybody goes through dark nights of the soul at different times, and that's how we learn. And you look back and go, "Oh my God, this if I had the old me having this conversation 20 years ago, I would have just told you to f off and get out the door," because just not able to even hold any kind of space for the opportunity for something to be that diverse and so expansive. So when you talk about the cure, it was one of my questions. The cure for Watiko is within us. I mean, what is that? If we're talking to and
Yeah,
with,
yeah,
but if they're not, if someone's just not anywhere, they're so distanced
yeah.
from their creative
Yeah,
spirit.
I can talk about that. And a way to think about it is, if you have this like multifaceted jewel,
Mhm.
there are all these facets that are all interconnected. And like, so the real cure for Watiko, I could say it in a number of different ways. On the one hand, it's to remember who you are, to connect with your true nature. It's to see the dreamlike nature of reality. It's to actually connect with the non-local field. That's a physics term. It's to cultivate compassion and love. All of those seem different, but they're all interconnected. Because when you, for example, you see the dreamlike nature, the energetic expression of that is love, is compassion. And when you see the dreamlike nature and you have compassion, well, the natural expression of that is to be creative. And, just on and on. So it's not separate, sort of things. It all has to do with, you see, Watiko, it's in every spiritual tradition. They're warning about Watiko. In the Quran, the holy book of Islam, in the last surah, the verse, they warn about Watiko. They call it the slinking prompter. Okay. And they call it the prompter because it prompts us to act unconsciously or react or act out evil. but it's the slinking prompter because it ultimately has no power. And it only can have power over us when we don't see it. Okay. But when you actually see, and that's what my whole work is about, is trying to help people to see Wetiko. When you see it, it's completely feeble and it just slinks away, hence the slinking prompter.
Yep.
Okay. So the idea is it's in the apocryphal text of the Bible. They call it the counterfeiting spirit. Here, the Wetiko has no creativity at all. But to the extent that we're not consciously accessing and expressing ourselves creatively, it will tap into our creativity. And as if we're outsourcing it, then it'll turn our own creativity against us and kill us. And where it's the counterfeiting spirit, it has no creativity, but it's a master impersonator. It puts us on, which has a double meaning. It fools us, but it puts us on like a suit of clothes so that we identify with its version of ourselves. If we're not awake, it'll present us an image. Oh, I'm wounded, I'm traumatized, I'm stuck, I'm, victim of abuse and all this stuff. And if we then identify with its version of ourselves, then it has us, then it can control us, then we become manipulated by Wetiko. But the idea, and think about what I'm just describing. You see, here, Wetiko can't steal our soul. It tricks us into we give our soul away.
Yeah.
And then we forget who we actually are and we identify with who we're not. And then we forget and disconnect from our creative agency and power. That's a recipe for madness. And that's Wetiko in a nutshell. And that's what our species is suffering from. And if I could just say one more thing, because it's mind-blowing, a way to understand this is through the imagination, right? And imagine that you're in a dream. And in the dream you're holding a particular perspective. Say, for example, the perspective is, oh, this dream I'm in is separate and objective and solid, right? And separate from me. And being a dream, the dream you're in will then shapeshift and reflect back, giving you all the evidence, confirming your viewpoint that it doesn't exist objectively. And now you have evidence. Now you have confirmation. Oh, my viewpoint is correct. The dream is objective and solid and separate. So the dream, which is nothing other than a reflection of your own mind, gives you even more evidence ad infinitum. What I'm describing is a self-reinforcing feedback loop whose origin is within your own mind, in which you've hypnotized yourself. No one else has done that. You've put yourself under a spell. You've used your own creative genius for creating reality and turned it against yourself in that you've enchanted yourself. That's Wetiko. That's what I'm trying to help people to see through. When enough of us see through that, we can connect with each other, like I'm saying, and activate our collective dreaming and dream ourselves awake. That's what's available to us.
Yeah. Well said. Thanks for saying that, Paul, because it is, I mean, I've been reading your books and sort of coming in and out of this topic for a couple of years, and it does take a while to really settle, and I was already pretty awake and aware before that, and just like really embodying this, and then also getting to be more familiar with the different ways that it can express itself, and not just in other people when you're witnessing, in yourself. I mean, that's the hardest part, isn't it? To actually go, well, I think I know this, and this is what's going to happen. And then you've got to go and look at yourself and go, oh, I'm actually still moving from Wetiko as well.
Oh, totally. I've been self-reflecting and just dealing and purifying and integrating the Wetiko in me for 40 plus years, and when I meet someone and they say, oh no, I don't have any Wetiko in me, I run the other way, because that person is dangerous from my point of view.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, this brings us to what you've written in the book as well, the me disease, malignant egophrenia, or egophrenia. So the so can you sort of unpack that a little bit for people?
Yeah. What malignant egophrenia, me disease, it's a misidentification of who we think we are. That was the phrase that I coined before I came across the word Wetiko. And then when I came across Wetiko, which is a Native American indigenous term, and it felt like a word of power, then I just began to use Wetiko. Because what malignant egophrenia, what I like about it is that it connotes like an ego, running amok, going, being out of control. And, in that ME disease, not only is it me disease, I just playfully, it's like, oh, it can stand for like mad emperor disease. When somebody is in a position of power, they will typically abuse it like a mad emperor. And another
Power
way
goes to
of
the head.
thinking,
We've got that saying, the power goes to the head.
right, exactly, right. And then another way of playing with the ME disease, it's Middle East disease, that what's playing out in the Middle East, if you think about Wetiko, is a systemic disease, it's a systemic infection that has afflicted the entire body politic. But in the Middle East, there's an acute inflammation of the very process of ME disease, of Middle
Mm.
East disease, of Mad Emperor disease. And if I could just say a small bit about the underlying psychology, the psychological mechanism that underlies Wetiko is when we project the shadow. So think about it. If I'm in a dream and I'm, not really owning my own darkness, my own shadow, the evil in me in potential, right? What am I going to do? I'm going to split off from the shadow. It gets projected outside into the dream. And then all of a sudden in the dream, because the dream is nothing other than a reflection of my own inner process, will walk someone or a group of people who embody and carry my own shadow. And as soon as that happens, now I have evidence the evil is out there. So
Yep.
then, and of course, by doing that, I've split because then I'm just identified with the light. Oh, I'm all good and pure, and the evil is out there. And
Yep.
the more I do that in a dream, the more the dream will just embody and reflect and give me evidence confirming that the evil's out there. When I amplify that process, what actually happens is that then I try to destroy the carrier of the evil. And what am I doing when I do that? That's the very initial inner process of trying to exterminate my own darkness. Now I'm playing out my inner process out in the external world because Watiko is an inner disease of the soul that plays itself. It has a magical ability to extend itself out into the world and play itself out synchronistically via events in the outer world. Just
Mm.
think about what I just said. It's an inner disease of the soul that reveals itself through the external world. That is exactly what a dream is, where the inner is the outer. And that's what quantum physics, because if I could just bring in quantum physics for a moment, because I mentioned that it's the medicine for Wetiko. Now, in so many spiritual traditions, they'll have this notion of a spiritual treasure that hidden, encoded in the multidimensional fabric of the universe are the spiritual treasures that help us to awaken, right? And in Tibetan Buddhism, which I do practice too, there's this tradition, the Terma tradition, which is, the hidden treasure tradition. And it's very developed, and it's not some sort of fairy tale where all of a sudden, if the community gets off balance and one-sided in the sleep, there'll be one of these terma, one of these hidden treasures that somebody will discover, and oftentimes they're hidden within a person's mind, right? And it's kind of like if people who are artists, and all of a sudden a song falls in their head, and they just they all of a sudden have this incredible song. Well, it was existing atemporally, and it was waiting for
Mm.
somebody to tune in and tend to receive its incarnation, its transmission.
Mm.
Terma are the same way, and I'm pointing. So terma are like these alarm clocks that are hidden in the fabric of the dream, and this isn't fairy tale. This scholars study this stuff. They're like keys that open locks and break spells. It's a real thing, and I'm pointing out that quantum physics is a modern day analog to a terma. It came into a world. It was discovered 100 years or so ago, and it came into our minds 100 years ago. And what quantum physics is in essence, because it seems all complicated. I mean, Einstein himself was saying, and he could never embrace it because he was one of the founding fathers, but he was still identified with that there was an objective world out there, and that science was studying the world. And that's what the scientists thought before the advent of quantum physics, that we're just passive witnesses trying to understand the nature of this universe. Well, quantum physics comes along and empirically proves again and again the idea of an objective world is just that, an idea in your head with no correlate at all to reality, that the act of observing this universe actually influences the universe observed. That's a description of a dream. Quantum physics, which is unquestionably being called the greatest discovery ever in all of human history in the realm of science, there's no debate about that. The controversy is, what does it mean? And I'm pointing out, I'm not a physicist, I'm pointing out it means that we're having a dream. It's an expression and a revelation of the dreamlike nature. that the act of observation is creative. When you realize that, then all of a sudden your whole creative process becomes unlocked. And
Yes.
you realize how we interpret our experience moment by moment, the
Mm.
meaning we place on our experience. No one else is doing that. We are literally creating our experience moment by moment, you
Yep.
know?
Yep.
And all of a sudden, so what I'm trying to point out in my work, so I'm trying to show, you see, what Tico, which in essence is identifying with a separate self, right? As soon as I identify with a separate self, something else has happened. We then conceive of the world as being objective. So that imagination of the world existing objectively feeds back into instantaneously and reciprocally co-arises with our imagination that we exist in a way that we don't as a separate self. And those two illusions reciprocally co-arise and reinforce each other. The idea of a separate self, the idea of an objective world. Quantum physics comes in and says, yo, there's no objective anything. There's nothing that's separate from your own awareness.
Mm.
And that's where it's revealing the dreamlike nature. And when you recognize that, what happened to the separate self? If I, as a separate self, need an object to be in relationship to in order to be a subject, if there's no objective anything, what happened to me as a subject? You see, quantum physics is promoting itself to be a spiritual path. That's what I mean, that it's helping us to remember who we are. And who we are these incredible creative beings who we already possess the solution to our myriad world crises, but we don't recognize that we already possess it. We are it.
Yeah.
That's what quantum physics is freely offering us and showing us. And I just, I don't know if you're, if people are aware. So I have this book I've written on quantum physics, and I got more downloads. So the new version is coming out like in a month, and
Oh,
it's
well,
all
what's that called?
about yeah, it's all about awakening to the dreamlike nature. That's the solution to the illness, to the disease that we have become afflicted with.
Yeah, and I'll get you to share so I can put the the links and stuff into the show notes, Paul, because
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sure
for sure.
enough to get a copy of that. I mean, I'm still trying to wrap my head around quantum physics. I'm not an expert in by any means, but a couple of things come up when you're saying that. A couple of questions for me. So, I mean, it's really like, from my perspective, as far as the allopathic medicine model goes, is that cancer and those sorts of diseases are expressions of isolation, extreme isolation from self inside the physical body and the energetic body, and then that manifests as some sort of illness or disease, right? So that's the medical physical version of what you were just saying, and the quantum and the mind aspect as well. So chat a little bit about that if you can. The next question was, how does religion play into all of this? Because you're talking about the ME and the me in the Middle East. Is religion a part to blame, or how is that another layer of the Watiko? I've got one more question, but I'll let you get to those two
Yeah,
first.
well, I think Jung says about religion that it protects us from having religious experiences, because we take on, like, we outsource our own authority,
Mm.
where the idea, and I'm not the only one who's had experience of this, is that we don't need any, like, mediation from a priest or a rabbi or, a sheikh or, a lama. We actually, interface with the divine, with the creative source of the universe each and every moment,
Mm.
you know, and, and it just to associate for a second, it makes me think of, it's a known archetypal thing that in times of darkness, that's when people have revelations. So, and Watiko is a revelation, but instead of it being a revelation from the heavens coming on a beam of light, it's coming through the underworld, through the dark, through matter.
Yep.
Quantum physics is a revelation. This universe is a revelation. It's a living oracle that's speaking symbolically. Symbols are the language of dreams. And and then with reference to the cancer thing, I think I have a chapter in that book about, cancer is a perfect metaphor, for Watiko, which you can think of as a mind parasite, a vampire, a mind virus, or cancer. But the thing about Watiko and seeing the dreamlike nature, which is the solution for Watiko, you discover something, and you discover that that dichotomy between mind and matter is false. That, that's the duality that we become entranced by. And that mind and matter in a sense, are not separate. And one way that we've all experienced that is through synchronicities.
Yeah.
Those moments of synchronicities are like these little cracks in the facade of seeming, solid reality that are like showing us the dreamlike nature where what's going on in our mind is somehow getting expressed via the medium of the outside world.
Yeah.
And when you amplify that, then you begin to realize, oh my God, this universe is a living oracle. It's continually reflecting back, what's going on inside of us. And when you see that, that's when all of a sudden your consciousness really expands. That's why in his work, Jung spent his whole career fighting for symbolic awareness. Now, just remember, symbols are the language of dreams. Okay, now a symbol is different than a sign. A sign you can understand with your mind, it's literal. One way, do not enter is an example of a sign.
Mhm.
Symbols are the emanation of a deeper something. And when, think about in dreams, we'll have something, like a symbol will crystallize, and symbols typically bring together opposites. And symbols are the emanation of this deeper place. And when we get into alignment with the symbol, all of a sudden, it brings us to that deeper place. It transforms our psychic energy
Yep.
and it transforms us. So the idea of symbolic awareness is to see this as the dream and interpret it in that way, and that's to step out of the literal, reductive, scientific materialist point of view, which, as Jung points out, is insane. That it's created incredible technology and it's improved all of our lives immeasurably, and it's killing us. It has a fatal flaw in it because it actually thinks the world exists objectively, separate from us. It's what I call, we have an objective hangover. Just like when you get drunk and you wake up the next morning, even though it's been proven again and again, there's no objective world. There's no objective anything. There's not even separate things. And yet it's so embedded in the collective unconscious that even a lot of quantum physicists still subtly see the world as separate and objective. That's the objective reality hangover.
And it's, everyone, as you said the words before, never outsource your authority to, some sort of medical body or a politician.
Yeah, well, if I could just say something about that, because that's so profound. Like if somebody came to me in my office and shared a dream they had last night, and the dream was exactly what's happening in the world, that, oh, they're making it in Australia, they're making it illegal to, like, if you disagree with the agreed upon, mainstream consensus reality version of things, you can get arrested and thrown in prison. And, oh, there's, war in Ukraine and the Middle East and, and everything that's happening in the world right now. Say that was the person's dream. And they came in, they shared the dream and they said, Paul, what does this mean? How would you, please interpret the dream? And in essence, what I would say is, well, the dream is showing me that you're not in touch with your creative agency and you've outsourced your power. And the powers that be are more than happy to access your own power and turn it against you to serve their own sinister ends. So what the dream is showing you is the importance of you, the dreamer, owning your own creative power consciously and creatively. And I think about, there's this great philosopher, Nicholas Berdyaev, and he talks about the second coming, of Christ. And he says, people who are passively waiting for the second coming will only see the crucified face of Christ. But people who are actively involved in the creative process, by them doing that, they are offering themselves to be the channel for the incarnation.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, no, well said, Paul. I mean, while you're saying all that, okay, so we've got this collective dreaming and we've all got our own interpretations of that. And then we've got in the background individual, soul pathways, journeys, etc. There are those who have the perspective of, okay, well, this whole planet is a simulation. It's actually a prison, and we actually need to get off it now because the way that species appears to be devolving, but expanding into, transhumanism, essentially into a totally different reality of itself, and maybe not needing this physical body, actually going into consciousness and AI and all that stuff. How is that another part of the Wetiko, or is that really, in your perspective, is that actually really happening? Do we need to get off here? Is this a prison planet from that perspective, or is that another layer of the
Yeah,
Wetiko
yeah.
again?
Yeah. Well, it's funny when I first started studying, the Buddha Dharma,
Mm,
I was studying with Theravadan teachers, and they were, when they're teaching samsara, the endless wheel of cyclic existence and suffering, is bad.
mm,
And the idea is to get to nirvana, like heaven, which is good, right? And that was the whole idea. And then I began, after a couple years, connecting with my Tibetan teachers. And it blew my mind what they were saying. They were saying, oh, there's no difference between samsara and nirvana. Samsara is nirvana, you
mm,
know? And it makes me think of, I mean, Christ saying the kingdom is spread all over earth and people just don't see it.
mm,
So, my understanding is that, yeah, we are on this planet in these physical bodies. It's as if spirit has descended into matter and gotten lost in matter and forgot its divinity. And this is the medium, though, through which we can have realization. We
mm,
can't have realization just celestial, amorphous, astral, etheric realm, you
mm,
know. And so yeah, the idea is, if we think that, oh, this is a prison planet and we need to get off,
mm,
that I would say that thought form itself is a subtle conception from and of Watiko that, is going to stop us from fully incarnating. Because as Jung says, individuation is incarnation. Okay. It's instead of getting out of the body, it's getting fully in the body, you
mm.
know?
Yeah.
And it makes me think of the great clairvoyant Steiner, Rudolf Steiner.
Mm,
And he was talking about, and I have a chapter, I think, in my third Watiko book, where he's saying the greatest momentous event of our time is the incarnation of the etheric Christ, right?
mm,
Not Christ coming in a body,
yeah.
but coming via the collective unconscious. And
Mm,
he goes, but before we can actualize this most momentous event of the incarnation of the etheric Christ, we have to encounter the beast. And the
mm,
beast is radical evil.
mm,
And and people who know about Steiner's work, he was also giving warnings about,
mm,
vaccines, and it was going to take away our spiritual faculty and disconnect us from being truly human. And I feel that, he was really, really tapping into something. But it helps me to contextualize what's going on in the world, the idea of, yeah, we are confronted with radical evil.
mm,
And it's non-local in that when you see it out there, just like when you see the unconscious, it's impossible to see the unconscious and not have your unconscious activated. It's
mm,
impossible to see Watiko or evil and not have that similar resonant energy,
yeah.
activated in you. But then it's a question, what do you do with that? And what
Mm,
I would suggest is that when you see the evil or the Watiko out there and it triggers you, and the potential Watiko in you is inflamed, what an incredible opportunity to self-reflect
mm,
and
mm,
add light to that previously darker content of your own mind. And
yeah.
then when you integrate that, you see what Jung says, and I think it's so true. He says the best way to deal with the evil in the world is to become familiar with the evil in yourself.
Mm,
Then you can really be an agent of the light. But so many spiritual people I know, they don't want to deal with evil or with the darkness in themselves, and they're trying to improve and dispel the evil out there. And it's like darkness trying to get rid of darkness because they
yeah.
don't know their own darkness.
No, exactly. And of course, I mean, I've just written another book too, Paul. I'm just going to reach down and find where it is under here. I've just got the draft copy of it. It's called Dying to Live. Oop,
Oh,
there it is.
well, beautiful.
So that's my book on death at the moment because of my family situation with my dad with cancer. And it started off as a journal to help me. And I've also incorporated all sorts of different ways that we can die. So everything from spiritual death, ego death, obviously, through the vaccines, as you just mentioned, the different ways, natural death, suicide, euthanasia, etc. And that's been a really cathartic journey for me because death is all throughout my chart. It's actually one of the topics I'm here to speak about. And and getting familiar with it through my own experiences and my own rites of passage with that. So that's obviously, a big spiritual thing for me. But in relation to death and also the parasite you mentioned before, the mind parasite, when we're talking about death as change, which is all it really is, just a transition from one state of being and consciousness to another. I believe there's lots of atheists out there, and that's totally fine, and everyone has their own perspective. And you mentioned the Christed light of us embodying that light to find the right balance within ourselves between, what the good and the evil aspects as well. If we have parasites working on us in that level or at that level, that means that all of us have got a physical parasite, yes? Should we all be doing physical practices to release parasites and clear them? Or do some of us not have parasites? And because there's no
we're host to an infinite number of organisms, and I'm not a science person in that way. But, in my work, I go into, I forget if it's in that book that you have or a different book, how parasites work. And I try to point out that that's really sort of metaphoric or symbolic of how this mind parasite works. Because we're even talking about, with COVID and, the whole alleged pandemic, and everybody's afraid of this like physical virus, and I point out that, the way that this physical virus works is really can help us understand how a mind virus works, and because the way that Watiko works, whether you use the metaphor of parasite or virus or vampire or cancer or whatever, and I think this is important, because we all have Watiko in potential. It's in the collective unconscious of our species. Yeah. And when it gets in us, which it always is in potential, if we're not awake, it starts to colonize our mind. It hijacks our executive function. It sets up a shadow government in our psyche. It'll dictate to the ego. And all of a sudden, it'll take over the immune system. The regulatory agencies that are supposed to protect us from invaders get co-opted by the very disease that it's supposed to protect us from. What I'm describing, that's what happens inside of a person's mind when they get infected. And Watiko, being a higher dimensional disease, like a parasite, it can literally take over a person and possess them. And they typically are oblivious. They have no idea. And what I'm describing, though, is that's an inner dynamic that happens within a human psyche when it gets afflicted with Watiko. That's playing out in the outside world. Think about it, how the very sort of, invaders or, the darker energies that we need to be protected from have co-opted the regulatory agencies in the US and probably all over the world. There's a shadow government, whether you call it the cabal or the deep state or whatever. And, there's this, it's why Jung had the word totalitarian psychosis, because what happens, we internalize that Watiko energy, and we become our own control system. There's no one else who has to control us. We control ourselves and keep ourselves in line. That's what's playing out in the world. But it's another example that encoded in the disease is its own medicine. Because when you see how what I just described that's happening in a human psyche when it gets colonized by Watiko, that's actually getting reflected by what's playing out in the greater body politic of the world, that's to begin to see the dreamlike nature. And when you see the dreamlike nature, that opens your heart, that expands your mind, that unlocks your creativity. That's the cure. So you see the thing, that's why I say Watiko is a quantum phenomena. Encoded, hidden within the pathology is the cure. But if we don't recognize that, it will just assume its program function and kill us.
Yep. Boom, mic drop. Totally. So would I be correct in saying that those who, either bought into the COVID narrative or got sick with it would be those in the collective globally, obviously, that were and are suffering from a deeper form of Watiko?
Well, I'm not vaccinated, and my dreams were showing me right away not to take the vaccine.
Same.
I can't judge people who chose to get vaccinated. The question is, what percentage of them were just propagandized and mind controlled by, the narrative put out by the legacy media, by the mainstream media, you know, and it's really interesting to me. What I've noticed is the process that people seem to not track the deeper evil that's playing out in the world, how that's actually expressing their own sort of lack of spiritual development.
Mm.
And I guess for me, because my whole process really started, like I said at the beginning, with this direct encounter with archetypal evil through the instrument of my father.
Mm.
And, the evil just destroyed my family. I haven't had a family for 20 some odd years. It almost killed me, but I was able to understand, oh, this is a revelation. And I was tracking and mapping stuff and began to realize, oh my God, this has informed my whole work.
Mm.
But you know, if I hadn't done that, it would have killed me. So the idea is that my being able to track the evil in the world came out of my own, encounter with it. And I think we all do. We
Yeah.
all have had encounters with the dark, whether it's through, oh, an abusive ex or our parents or a teacher or a sibling, the
Yep.
culture we live in, whatever. And there's a way of holding that encounter with the dark where instead of just dissociating,
Mm.
becoming unconscious, turning a blind eye,
Yep.
becoming numb, or becoming an unwitting minion of the very darker forces, there's a way of actually carrying your experience where you then can actually, when we engage with the darkness in the world, we're able to be in touch with our light
Mm.
and to ignite the light in others, and that, but I think that only comes out of when we've had our own encounter with evil and are able to see that as an initiation. And I guess one final thing, I think it's important thought form to offer right before the pandemic, or the plandemic happened, or the scandemic, however you would
There's a
reference
few
it.
different names for it. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. But you know, like one somebody who heard me just give a recent thing criticized me because I mentioned the pandemic, and they're saying, no, you're unconsciously giving it legitimacy.
Mm.
By calling it a pandemic, you should call it a plandemic. So maybe I'm doing that now. But right before that, I finished a major chapter in my third book on Watiko, and it was all about the archetype of the shaman.
Mm.
And I was pointing out that we as a species and individuals were all being called to make a shamanic descent into the darkness of the unconscious. And I bring in Jung. Jung points out the big problem in our world today. The number one problem is that we don't know what's happening. And what's happening is that we're confronting the darkness
Mm.
of the unconscious, the darkness of the soul. And then a little did I realize how prescient I was being. I finished the article, and then weeks later, the lockdown happens. And the shaman is the wounded healer. The shaman is the dreamer, the storyteller, the creative artist. And the shaman actually takes on the illness of the person or the community they're working with, and they fall ill
Yep.
themselves,
Yep.
right? But yet, instead of staying ill, the occasion of them falling ill catalyzes them to connect with their center, with the self, even more deeply than before.
Yep.
And they're able to metabolize that illness, and them doing that in a way clears a pathway in the collective unconscious for other
Yep.
people to do the same. And the point is that we are all shamans in training. And it's no one in their right mind who would ever choose to be a shaman. You'd have to be completely insane because the suffering is so overwhelming. But
Okay.
shamans are somebody who are called, and
Mm.
we are all being called. And remember, a shaman is the creative artist, okay? And so in a sense, we've all been made crazy by the collective insanity
Mm.
that we're dreaming up into our world. But if we become accomplished shamans, creative artists, wounded healers, dreamers, storytellers, we're able to not get identified with that insanity, and to actually assimilate it and to connect with our basic sanity in such a way that we become the antibodies or the antipsychotic agents in the greater body politic. And that's our service to the world. And that becomes contagious. When you meet somebody who embodies that and is creatively expressing themselves, that can go viral. That becomes contagious, just like it was taught to us that COVID is so contagious. Well, that realization is contagious in a positive way, and that can inflame the global awakening that it's potentially happening.
Yeah, totally. I mean, to me, the whole COVID thing is basically that it's a physical expression of the mind virus. It's actually it's a consciousness that's transmitted, no fear and all those things. So that makes total sense of what you're saying. I'm just trying to take notes at the same time as you're saying things, Paul, because as usual, there's just like so many truths happening. To wrap it up though, because we're just over the hour. So, and I'd love to do another chat with you, another point too, because there's lots more I'd like to dive into if you're open to that.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'd love to know your hypothetical vision for humanity. Okay, so say when we end up, because when you're saying that, I just had this vision of like, okay, when we are embodying ourselves as the shaman and we're on the edge of that cliff, we are going to, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, we will jump off the cliff and change and take a different trajectory because we'll trust that suddenly we'll grow wings or we'll fly or we'll be okay with that. I got a lovely visual of
Yeah. Well, if I could just say one thing about that, like it brings up really clearly this amazing dream I had a number of years ago where I was at the edge of a really tall stage. It was like a cliff. And there was a guy way down and he was doing these magic tricks and everybody was oohing and ahhing. And then at one point he did a magic trick and somebody in back of me pushed me over the edge of the stage and I began falling and it was really high and I became lucid. And I had this incredible lucid dream. It was chanting Om Mani Padme Hum and, had an amazing spiritual experience. And when I woke up, I was like contemplating the dream and I was like, wow, that's so interesting. I would never have chosen to jump off that edge of that stage. Yet I dreamed somebody to push me off, and it actually was in service to my evolution, So to answer your question, how I see, this going, for example, I want to bring in quantum physics once again. And because quantum physics was trying to understand the microstructure, the building blocks of this physical universe, and smaller in scale, the more down it went in scale, it didn't find anything that was made of matter. It found mind, it found consciousness. And they termed this phrase, a few phrases, but you could call them these elementary particles were the building blocks of this physical universe that existed in a state in any and every potential they ever possibly could, each and every moment up until the moment that we observe them. And then when we observe these elementary particles, one of those potentials actualizes and all the rest vaporize into parallel worlds. And then the very next moment, the same thing happens again and again and again. And this isn't me. This is some of the most rigorous, hardcore scientists in the world are saying what this means is that even if one of those possibilities is highly, ridiculously, this is a quote, improbable, it could still happen this very next moment. Okay? What that means is that the fact that our species could actually awaken in time to avert the myriad catastrophes that we are conjuring up, like the Sorcerer's Apprentice together. Quantum physics is saying that's completely in the realm of the possible, And it, just one more thought. Sometimes I really feel this, like a felt sense that we're having a recurring dream. We've been here before, that we're, about to blow ourselves up, and then we do it. And then, like in a dream, which is, there's no time, there's no linear time in a dream. So 14 billion years, however long it takes to have gotten here, then in the flash of an eye, we're back again, same scenario, blow ourselves up again, again and again and again, and we do that. Maybe this is the time where we actually can recognize what's being revealed to us, that we don't have to do that, and we can actually rechannel all of the resources that we are investing into creating weapons of mass destruction. How insane is that? We can actually rechannel those resources
Mm.
in a way that's in service to who we're discovering ourselves to be, which is
Yeah.
that we're not separate, that we depend on each other for our own well-being,
Mm.
and that our true nature is love, is compassion.
Exactly. I was just about to say the L word. It's and I totally share those sentiments, Paul. And I know a lot of people listening, watching will, and people that follow myself and you too are on the same page. But I think there's also the background, or the part two of that question, or that statement is like, let's just hope it happens in time. Because it's like, how bad are things going to get before we do actually
Well,
make
I would
that?
say, I mean, that's so beautiful to hope it happens in time, meaning in linear time and in the nick of time. But it also, I want to point out, it's already happened atemporally. In other words, what I mean is outside of time, we've already awakened.
Yep.
And when we see that, we can recognize that everything that's happening exactly as it is in the world is in a way the footprints of that awakening that's already happened atemporally
Mm.
being cast back in time. And when we see, being like a dream, when we see that, we actually then, that part of us that has already awakened, we are literally magnetically attracting that into incarnation. That's the power of dreaming. That's the power that we have to create our experience. It's unimaginable. And that's what quantum physics is showing us. That's what Wetiko is like showing us.
Mm.
And if we don't get the message, then I'm saying, well, then we're fated to destroy ourselves. But we are at such an amazing point in history, and more of us are awakening to this.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, by that notion, or along that train of thought, there isn't, and I say this too, there's no need to ascend if we are already infinite consciousness. There's no need to, no, we don't need to escape
Yeah,
or
yeah,
go
this
higher.
is
Already are that. Yeah.
yeah. The kingdom is already here. We
Mm.
just need to open our eyes and see it. Watiko is a form of blindness that doesn't know it's blind. It actually thinks it's sighted, and it thinks it's more sighted than people who actually see. And it's a self-induced form of blindness. It's a hysterical blindness.
Mm. Cool.
And all we need, even in the Bible, they talk about Watiko in terms of, oh, there's like this mind blindness, or Christ says, yeah, people's eyes can't see, they don't know they can see, they've actually closed their eyes. Yeah,
Yep. Take the
that's
scales
describing
off the
Watiko.
eyes. Yeah,
Yeah,
remove the scales.
we have literally closed our eyes, and all we have to do to see is open our eyes and look.
Yep.
There's nothing stopping us.
Cool.
Yeah,
Well, people who are listening and watching, open your eyes. That's a great way to end it,
yeah,
Paul.
yeah.
Thank you so much. Where can people get in touch with you for a start before we sign off?
Yeah, well, I guess the easiest and best way, if people want to awaken in the dream, go to awaken, AWAKEN, in the dream.com. And there's a ton of articles, all for free. There's no paywall, because this is medicine. I really want to get this out to people. There's a ton of interviews like this. It's not monetized at all. Yeah, people can buy my books, or, pay for a session. But other than that, everything is free, because I'm just really wanting to get this information out.
Yeah, that's great, Paul. Thanks. And I'll include those details in the show notes as well. And again, thank you so
Great.
much for your time. I'm just going to press record here on the Zoom before we get off on YouTube, and I'll go back to that and see what. So we've had a few comments here, and everyone saying thank you very much, this makes me think of the slinky, slimy creature in the movie Monsters, Inc. when they're talking obviously about the Watiko and the slinky. What was that phrase that you used about the parasite? Yeah. So
Yeah, the slinking prompter. Yeah,
that
yeah.
one kind of
Yeah,
brings up
yeah.
all sorts of horrendous visuals. So thank you again,
Yeah.
Paul. I look
Yeah,
forward to
totally. Thank you so much. And yeah, feel free to be in touch for
I
sure.
will.